Yay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Hello.
I feel like you guys should get a major award for making it back to the second week on time. That's like big praise. Jesse and I were just saying we both had that, what was it? The paralysis a little bit because
The
we
waiting
knew we
mode.
had this, the waiting mode, like we knew we had this. So we were like just sitting here for a while, um, unable to do much else. Um, So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
people
very
saying same in
impressed.
the chat.
Yeah, I'm very impressed that so many people are back for week two. Good job.
Cool. All
All
right,
right,
let's go
cool.
ahead and get started. So the thing we're covering today is probably my favorite topic about ADHD, which is kind of motivation and that task initiation, getting started on stuff. Partly because that was the thing that before I knew about ADHD that I struggled with so much. Oh, let me go ahead and share the slides. Forgot to do that. Let me move that. Okay. Where are my slides? Sorry, I have ADHD, so I'm less than organized. Cool. Week two, motivating your brain. Cool.
Yeah, and before we get started, I do want to reiterate that we are time blind, so we're keeping track of the time. But if we go under a few minutes or we're really trying not to go over. So just
Right.
bear with us with the whole time blindness thing. We're trying our best, but I think we're good today on a solid hour. I think we got this.
Yeah. So for me, before I knew that I had ADHD, I just knew that I struggled a lot with finding motivation. So I was like always seeking out different productivity tips. Like I was obsessed with like finding out all the latest like software and apps and whatever would help me be more productive. And it never seemed to work, but I always knew that was like the biggest concern was like, how do I motivate myself? And one of the biggest problems that people with ADHD have is like, we know what to do. Like we have the knowledge of like what we should be doing. It's not, I think this is like the conflict that neurotypical people don't understand. And so when we're struggling to get started with something, they're trying to like inform us of what we should do. And it's like, no, we know what to do. The problem is like, we can't do what we know. Like there's something about that. I said it before, like task initiation, like getting started on, I don't have that slide. Getting started on something is where we struggle. It's like, we know what we should be doing and we know how to do it once we're kind of in it, but like kickstarting it is where we really struggle. And the thing I learned after I was diagnosed with ADHD that really made me understand it was how people that are neurotypical that don't have ADHD are motivated and how that's different from people with ADHD. So neurotypical motivation. The three kind of primary things that motivate most people with without ADHD, what most people are motivated by is importance, rewards, and consequences. And like this makes sense to us. Like you see that and you're like, oh, it makes sense that those would kind of motivate us. So when you look at most like productivity advice, they're formed around this. It's like, how do we make sure that we know what the important task is? How do we flag it in the app or whatever? And how do we give ourselves rewards to motivate us to continue doing the thing? And how do we make sure that there's consequences so that if we don't do it, something bad happens? Like that's how we think it's going to motivate us. But because we think this, we set these myths in our mind, kind of like I just said, like if it was important to me, I should be able to do it. Like I start to think that like, oh, if it was important to me, I would do it. So then when I don't do it, I feel really bad about it. And another one is, oh, if I increase the reward, that'll increase my motivation. And harsher consequences will give me more willpower. And these just aren't true. They're like drilled into us growing up usually, but they aren't actually true. And again, it comes down to like that task initiation, like getting started is where we really struggle. It's like once we get to doing something, so like if you say you started doing the dishes, you put a few dishes away, once you're there, continuing to put dishes away isn't as hard. Like once you kind of have that momentum going, you're in the middle of the task, like doing more dishes when you're already doing dishes, like that's not the hard part. Like that feels pretty easy. It's kind of like the train is already rolling down the tracks. But when you haven't started yet, when you're sitting on the couch and you're like, oh, I should really do the dishes. There's like, that's like the hardest thing in the world, to get up off the couch and walk to the next room to do those dishes. And so there's this thing about the what is it called? The interest-based nervous system, which is the idea proposed by Dr. William Dodson. And this is how people with ADHD were motivated by something totally different than those three things that motivate most people. So importance, rewards, and consequences aren't the things that motivate us the most. Like rewards that are kind of immediate, like those can sort of be helpful, but in general, like if you say, hey, if you do this thing and you'll get a reward in 3 weeks, it's like, well, that's not going to motivate me at all, which is why we struggle with, like, I don't know, like investing or like making choices like that that are going to help us long term. It's really difficult because it doesn't provide that motivation. But when you have an interest-based nervous system, which people with ADHD usually have, we're motivated by 4 different things. And I like to I've kind of renamed them so they all start with C, just go, it's easier for me to remember. And that's captivate, create, compete, and complete. So what do those mean? So the first one is a little bit more obvious. So captivate, this is all about things that are interesting. When I first, my wife kind of suggested to me after talking with a friend, like, hey, maybe you should look into ADHD, because she was telling me more about it. And a lot of these things sound, really familiar. You might want to look into it a little bit more. And at the time, I said, like, there's no way that I have ADHD, because I'm total, like, I can totally focus on the things that interest me. Which is hilarious, because that's very, like, that's what people with ADHD, we can focus on the things that interest us. Like, that's sort of the whole thing. And so captivate is all about that, like things that captivate our attention, that interest us, that we're like really into, like those are easy ways to motivate us. The second one is create. And this is all about like creativity and novelty. Like this is why we really like new hobbies, because new hobbies are novel. It's something new. It's something we don't know yet. So there's kind of this like fun of discovery. And often those hobbies are creative. Like we get to kind of flex our creative muscle. The third one is compete. And this one is all about like challenge and competition, but it's to your level. So some people will hear this and be like, oh, I'm not very competitive, but it's kind of like specific to where your skills line up with a challenge. So like, for example, when I was in school, if a teacher ever said like, here's like some math problems to do, oh, and here's a problem over here that no one can solve, this is a really difficult one, like I'm going to ignore everything else and I'm going to focus on that one that the teacher thinks no one can solve. Like that's like, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. Like that's the one thing that I definitely need to do. And Trini, you had an example about skydiving when we were talking about this before.
Yes, I am kind of like the reverse psychology works for me. So I actually went skydiving because someone told me that I just wouldn't, that I was too scared to do it. And so like this really works for me. I'm very competitive. If someone tells me I can't do something, I'm probably going to do it, and I'm going to do it like then.
Right.
So I went skydiving. I went to watch people skydive, and I ended up putting a backpack on and going, because I was basically talked into it this way. And so I don't know if that's unique to me, but I think that's pretty common that there's like a lot of competitiveness with ADHD.
Yeah. And with kind of all of these to kind of varying degrees, like some people may lean really heavy into that. There's definitely people with ADHD that are drawn to extreme sports and things like that high adrenaline sort of thing, partly because of that, but others won't relate as much, but the challenge is on a different scale for you. And then the fourth one is complete. And this is all about deadlines and urgency. So it's like, if that thing is due in 10 minutes, like that's when you can kind of, jump into action. Like for me, every school paper, it didn't matter if I had like 2 weeks or 2 months to work on a school paper. I did all of them the night before, because that was when suddenly it became urgent, and I could like the motivation then showed up, even though there was major consequences if I didn't do it. And I knew it was important. Like those things didn't motivate me until the urgency kind of showed up, when that due date was like imminent. That's when suddenly I could like fly into action. So these
I just want to say a lot of people were nodding their heads during that.
I think that's a common trope in the ADHD world of like night before, and usually doing really well too. Like when that motivation shows up, we usually excel. I mean, this isn't universal, but I think it's pretty common to be like, oh, I did the thing the night before, I flew through it, and then the teacher said is like the best work they've ever seen or something like that. And I'm like, I don't want to tell them that I ignored the topic for 2 months and did all of it last night, but that's the reality of it.
Yeah, and I've
Um,
often thought about that. Sometimes I think that's part of the problem, right? Is we have that confidence, like that we can pull it off at the last minute. So we do try to do that in the last minute, right?
yeah.
So it kind of like plays against itself sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, so these are like the four, what I call motivation sparks: captivate, create, compete, complete. And I use these all the time. Like for me, whenever I'm struggling with a new task, like I'm like, how do I get motivated to do this thing? I kind of put it through like, I don't know what you call it, like a rubric, or like I try to say, like, for example, I'm writing a book right now and I'm getting close to the end, but I keep stalling at different times. And then I get to a point, I'm like, okay, how can I get started on this thing? And I go to these. So I'm like, how can I make it captivating? Because I am interested in it, but that doesn't seem to be working. And I kind of go through these like, oh, create. Maybe I can do something creative. Oh, what if I tried to like, I don't know, tried to write a chapter from like a weird, like a first person instead of third person or something like that, like something to make it novel. So I use these all the time, even for like daily tasks, like chores. Like, how can I make this a challenge that's going to kind of ignite that motivation for me? And then once you've gotten past that task initiation, like I kind of said, once you get going, it's kind of like a train where you build up that momentum, and then it becomes a lot easier to do more and more work once you're kind of initiated into a task and you kind of get rolling. That momentum sort of builds up. But I wanted to kind of walk through, like, what does it actually look like to put these to the test? So I've mentioned a couple times, like the doing the dishes, because that's like one of the most mundane chores. There's nothing interesting about it, but we all usually have to do it or something like it. So we're going to walk through captivate, create, compete, complete, and see how we can use those to motivate ourselves to do the dishes. So yeah, so let's start with captivate. First I wanted to say, very, very important to note, like, we're not looking for the solution here. We're not looking for like, oh, this is the strategy that is always going to work when I need to do the dishes, because there's no strategy that is always going to work. Like the whole thing with making your ADHD like work for you and working with it is finding different ways to approach things. So what we're trying to do here is come up with a model we can use to develop those future strategies for taking on a lot of those tasks we listed earlier. Like, how can we approach those to come up with new strategies kind of on the fly and maybe build up like a playbook of things I can try in the future? So we're just looking for possible solutions here. So with doing the dishes, we're like, okay, I've got to motivate myself to do the dishes. I don't really want to do it. Let's go through motivation sparks. So the first one is captivate. Okay, so there's nothing about dishes that is interesting. There's nothing that's going to be captivating about doing the dishes. So how could I use that spark? Well, one thing that is interesting is maybe a hobby that I'm into lately. Like maybe I've just really gotten into doing synth music, or I'm really into like board gaming or something like that, like some hobby that's got me interested lately. And so for most hobbies, there's going to be like a podcast or a book or something related to it. And so one thing I use a ton for mundane chores like that is I pick a podcast for a hobby. So some podcasts that I really want to listen to, and I just sort of set like a little rule for myself. Like I can listen to other podcasts whenever, but this one podcast, this is my chore podcast. And I don't call it that because that would sound terrible. Like I wouldn't want to do it if I called it a chore podcast. But the idea is like, I can only start listening to this podcast if I'm doing a chore. And then once I'm doing it, it becomes easier to do it. So that's one way you can use sort of a podcast, because then like the reframe isn't like, oh, I'm going to do the dishes and I'll listen to a podcast. Instead, it's like, oh, I'm going to go listen to my podcast and I'll do the dishes while I listen to it. Like the main task I'm doing is the fun thing that I'm actually interested in, and that thing that's going to captivate my attention. Because then while I'm doing it, I'm not really thinking about the dishes. I'm listening to the podcast. I'm just sort of like going through the motions, but my brain is like activated by the podcast that is interesting to me. So I want to challenge you right now. What other ways, for specifically for this task of doing the dishes, what other ways could you use Captivate? Like what's something you could find to use like interest, something that's going to grab your attention that would help motivate you to start doing the dishes? And you can just shout them out. Or if they're in the chat, I don't know if there are people older in the chat. Either
Someone
way.
said they would put on a trashy TV show.
That's a great, I do that a lot. I'll put it on, I do a lot of reruns. So I'll do like old Seinfeld episodes or something like that. Like something that's fun to rewatch, but maybe I don't need to be paying perfect attention to.
I will say one of the things that I do is that I talk to my mom on the phone all the time, and she and I are like chore buddies. Like we're both seem to be doing chores on the phone. So we kind of body double. And I don't know if this would fall under Captivate. But,
no, that totally, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to podcasts. A lot of people do listen to music and podcasts. I think podcasts are great for chores. It's very
Mm-hmm.
common that people listen to podcasts or something on YouTube.
Nice.
Focusmate is body doubling. We just started trying out Focusmate. We really like it, and that one is free, right? They have a free version of Focusmate.
I think you can do it like a couple times a week for free or something.
Yeah,
like
for
that.
anybody that wants to try that out, it's body doubling virtually, and it's called Focusmate, and I think they have a free version, and it is really, really cool.
Nice.
Very easy to set up.
Cool. So those are kind of a few different things we talked about, and that's just for one of the sparks and maybe the most difficult for dishes. So let's go with the second one, create. And again, this is about like creativity and novelty. So I'm going to give a couple examples, and you're probably going to think that they sound a little bit silly, and that's because they are, but they are still effective. So like one way you could make doing the dishes more novel is like, if you're like putting away dishes, like do it alphabetically. Like I'm going to go through the alphabet, like A, there's nothing with A, but B, okay, I'm going to do the bowls first. And then like C, you're going to go down alphabetically. And that I know it sounds kind of silly, but that little change can make it a little bit easier to get started. Like, oh, I'm going to do it alphabetically. What is there anything that starts with A or C? Like, and you kind of like, it's just enough to get you a little bit more interested. And like another one that I do, and this one I do a lot, I'm not even sure why it works, but it's just something about the little novelty of making it different. When I unload a dishwasher, I unload everything to the table first. So I kind of move all the plates to the table in stacks, and I kind of stack everything. And it's the sort of thing that sounds crazy to people that are neurotypical, I think, but with people with ADHD may be more likely to understand. Like there's something about that novelness of like, oh, I'm going to move it to the table and kind of put it in stacks and then move the stacks to the cupboard. So those are a couple of little ways to add novelty to doing the fun task of the dishes. Can anyone think of any other ways to use the create motivation spark?
I remember the last time we did this, someone said they had like dish gloves that they really liked. Like they had like, would that be in a create section? Like they made it fun because like they liked these flowery special gloves that they were using to do dishes with, or like a soap that they really liked. Like they really took the time. Yeah, special soap, someone just said.
Yeah, those are perfect ways,
it like enjoyable,
making it more novel, because it's kind of making it something special. I think totally like fits in with that, like something to make it more than just like do the boring chore, like adding something novel to it. And it doesn't, like, you're kind of mixing it up, like with create and like the novelty, you do have to mix it up, because you can't do, like, pretty soon you'll get bored of those gloves. Like those aren't going to work anymore. And that's fine. Like that's a success because it worked for the times you used it. And then maybe it's something else the next time. And I do that for a lot. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, someone said like putting on scented candles and turning like a different color light on, or a different lighting in the room. And I will say that like lately, I'm just gonna throw this out there. Lately, I've been kind of romanticizing chores, and I will like make the house like make it like a spa, like make my house kind of like a spa while I'm doing it. And it's like that has really helped me lately. So it sounds kind of silly, but like dimming the lights or like putting on candles, it really does make a difference. It's
Yeah, I
the
love that.
weirdest
I
thing.
think like changing up the environment like that can totally make a difference. Is there any other ones before we move on?
Putting on goggles and pretend like you're playing VR. I want to see somebody try to do dishes with the,
Yes,
yeah, that
I
would
love
be.
that. That's exactly like that sounds silly, but it's the sort of thing that would absolutely work. Like you commit to it, and then it's like this is silly, but it gets you going. Like, and that's
Someone walking
all
in
we're
on
trying to
that,
do.
that would be hilarious.
Cool. So let's go ahead and do the third motivation spark. So compete. This is all about like making it a challenge somehow. I've done before. I have a friend that has ADHD and we struggle with a lot of the same things. And so maybe you could text a friend and like race them, which sounds silly, but excuse me, that's something I've literally done before and has worked. Like I bet I'll be done with the dishes. I'll unload the dishwasher before you. And like that sort of little challenge can like make that difference in getting the task initiated. Another one I mentioned watching the Seinfeld show, but there's the Seinfeld method, which is like he talks about when he was writing jokes. He would write a joke every single day and then just check off the thing every single day. And his whole strategy was just like never not do that. Like every single day, check it off. And long term, like that's not going to work for people with ADHD. Like at some point, you're going to miss a day and then you're going to feel like depressed because it's like, oh, the whole thing fell apart and now it's all over. But you can sort of do like sprints. And so a lot of times I'll do something like, I'm going to do like Seinfeld method for 5 days, like 5 days in a row. So I'm just Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I'm going to do a chore and check it out. Like I'll draw like 5 boxes on. We have like a whiteboard in our kitchen that I use all the time for all these like little strategies. And I'll use that as like check it off every single day. And you can do the same thing for like work, like have like a certain task that you don't love to do at work. And then just give yourself a checkbox to check off. So like just for this week, I'm going to do it every single day.
Yeah,
And make that sort of a
someone in the
challenge.
comments said that they suck at that, and I also suck at that, but I think just shorter periods of time, 3 days, I think when they have those month-long challenges where you have
Oh,
to
they're the
check every day,
worst. Those are the
like
worst.
those are not meant for us. Like
Yeah.
if they work for you, I'm impressed and that's amazing. You should put that on your resume. But if you can do 3 or 4 or 5 days, I think that might help just to shorten it.
Right. Right. And then let's see. Oh, did I ask, did anyone have any additional ones for
Oh
that?
yeah, and as far as compete too, you could also like set a timer and time yourself and see how fast you can do it. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
just like a pretty easy one, but just to see how quickly you can get it done.
Right.
Is a good one. I don't know if let's see if anybody, yeah, a whiteboard, writing stuff on the whiteboard. Uh, Yeah, yeah. You
Cool.
guys get the
So
idea with compete, I think.
yeah, and then we'll do the last one, complete. And so you already mentioned timers, and that one kind of fits both. Like you can challenge yourself with the timer, but complete again is all about kind of urgency. Like complete of the four, it's not the best word, but it's basically about your deadlines, like having deadlines, having urgency. And so for like dishes, you could set a timer and like time yourself for how long it takes to collect all the dishes in the house. Or maybe you watch like a show, if you're watching one that has commercials, and you're like, how many dishes can I do during the commercial break? Because there's only a limited amount of time doing it. And you're sort of mixing like the challenge and the urgency. But yeah, something that gives you a deadline. And I actually just wrote about this in my newsletter this week. Sometimes fake deadlines can be difficult. So you have to kind of figure out a way to make that deadline, that urgency feel I don't know, like real enough that it actually motivates you. And I think it's easier for small things like dishes. For me, I can just set like, I bet I can do dishes in less than 10 minutes, set a timer for 10 minutes. And that's enough for me a lot of the time for a small task like dishes. For a bigger project, like fake deadlines don't work at all. And I have to come up with something to make it real. And the things I mentioned in the newsletter this week, like I announced that I was going to do beta reading, and then a bunch of people were ready to read it. And then I was like, oh crap, I have to finish. Like, I don't want anyone to see what the book looks like right now. So I have to finish it in time because I set a date. Or another thing I've done is hired an editor for the book where I'm like, the editor needs this by a certain date. Like, there's nothing that made me like, I didn't need to hire the editor at a certain time, but by doing so, it forced me to hit a date, and that urgency like motivated me to get it done. Does anyone have any other versions for complete, for urgency?
No, but I wanted to mention real quick, if anybody needs to stand up or stretch or get a drink or take a break, I think we can do that right after this slide. We can take a couple minute
Yeah.
breaks.
Mhm.
Is this a good stopping point? I saw somebody like stretching, and I just reminded me that we can take a couple minutes if you need to. Sure.
Yeah, so we're gonna
But
we're
the
gonna do
complete thing,
breakout
like
room
he's
in just a
talking
minute.
about, I use another person a lot of times, like an external validation partner all the time. I'll text someone and say, hey, I need to finish this by a certain time. Can you check in on me? And like, I have like a buddy system now. I never had that before, and it's extremely helpful for me to
Right.
have people that I can say, hey, hold me accountable for this, please. So that's maybe not for dishes, but for larger tasks.
Right. And again, like the dishes is almost just like we're using it as an example of like, even for this extremely mundane basic chore, like these can help you come up with different ways to get it done. And it's not going to work every time, but it's all about like using these as sort of like a jump start of like, how can I motivate myself to do this thing? And these are kind of like a great template, like for a starting point for that. And using that to build kind of different strategies. Oh yeah, so we did end up doing this at the beginning. So we talked about like, what are some common tasks or activities you get stuck on in your daily life and can't find the motivation to do. And so I want you to remember the ones you thought of before, and then we're going to go into a breakout session. So think about one or two of those tasks. And then when we go into the breakout session, we're going to, again, kind of go around the group and describe a task that you normally get stuck on. And then one person will kind of describe their task, and then the group brainstorm together to try to come up with like 2 or 3 strategies using those motivation sparks as a template, again, to get started. But those, like, you don't have to be like, oh, this strategy fits create. It's just, those are kind of a starting point to come up with unique new ways to approach a problem. Yeah, so we're going to jump to breakout sessions in just a moment. And I think it says right over there, yeah, the person with the closest upcoming birthday, they can go first and sort of keep time. And I think we're going to do, are we going to do 15 minutes for this?
I think 15, and then we'll kind of check in and see how you guys are doing. We'll start with about 15 minutes. So
cool. Yeah, sounds good. So that'll be, yeah, we will do that now. So let me stop the share, and I will share this slide again once everyone is in their breakout.
I always love the breakout sessions. Usually everyone comes back smiling, and I don't know if they're happy to be out of the breakout session or happy because it was a good experience. You'll have to tell us. We always feel like we're like, oh, they've been in there too long, we should get them out. But then usually when they come back, they say, no, we wanted more time. Yeah. Is that true? Was that enough time, or did you want more time?
It wouldn't matter. We talk ADHD, we just talk to.
I told you.
I was gonna say that's not a thing. There's never enough time.
Yeah.
Awesome. So were there
It's forever for us to start and forever to stop.
Jesse said
right.
that when you guys were in the breakout session, he said they probably already talked about our thing and they've moved on to 6 other topics by now. And then when we bring them in, they're not going to remember what the.
So yeah, on that, does anyone remember like any tasks that you kind of came up with, any unique strategies or solutions for your next approach? Anywhere, just hop in and say them. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I got some great tips thanks to my partners in crime. Talking about trying to get started on a book writing and just sort of being afraid to put words on paper. And so one of my partners suggested just getting it all out, just getting it, either recording it in voice or just writing, getting whatever. It doesn't matter if it's not grammatically perfect,
Right.
but if it's down, then you can edit and you can perfect from there. But getting it on paper is the most important part, and that's very helpful. And
yeah, that's awesome. One thing I do a lot that's kind of related to that, because there's nothing scarier than like the blank page. Like, where do I start? What do I do? what I do a lot for things like that is I pretend I'm writing an email to a friend. So I pretend that somebody asked me a question about whatever topic I want to write about. And then I just write the email as if I'm answering them, or I like pretend I'm writing, I don't know, a comment on Reddit or something like that. And then I get a bunch of content and I'm like, okay, if I want this to be, I don't know, an article or something, or if I want it to be a chapter in the book, now I have a bunch of stuff and I can tweak it so that it fits more for that, that context or whatever. But for me, I a lot of the time I'll be writing a chapter and right at the top, it'll say like, hey, Brandon, or something like that, so that it just like helps break through that initial barrier of like that scary blank page. That's awesome. Yeah. Anyone else have any thing they wanted to share? Everyone forgot them all. They're like desperately trying. What did we talk about again?
Well, we brought up batching, which is something I kind of like, where you just put certain tasks together and start on one, and as soon as you finish one, you're going to do this. You're going to do this, and that way maybe you can get through some shorter things, or get started on something a little easier. I like
nice.
that.
Yeah, I love that.
That's one thing I do is I start with a very, very easy one.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And build up.
Like it helps if you can find something, that's really, really easy, or maybe even fun, but fun with a time limit so that you don't just do that fun thing forever and ever, but like something that kind of helps get you started on the thing, stacking it. Yeah, batching I think is great. I do that a lot with just random things.
I looked at the last list I made and I did the top 3 urgent things. And everything else that doesn't have an absolute deadline is still there.
Right. Yeah. Those deadlines.
Those are the things that you want to look at and like break them down by the create, captivate. Like you want to look at each one, like how can I make this one more fun, more, more competitive, and just kind of those ones that are continuously stuck on the list every day, really dive into them and like kind of tweak them with that system that we just talked about.
Right. Anyone else have anything? We got a few kind of minutes left before the end of the hour.
So I'll just say something that came up in our group with 2 of us was both like around like stuff with work, and we come up with strategies, but there was also this issue of like, maybe these are just tasks that it would be better to delegate and like maybe or look at a different role, like because I've experienced this, like I can get myself cold started on like writing design docs or whatever, but then it'll feel like oftentimes just I'm pulling teeth the whole time. Like I know what to do tomorrow, but like every step is like I'm trudging in the snow and the in the freezing cold up a mountain. Now sometimes I think that might be because of all the stress I've added to myself and like why are you such a screw up and you didn't start till late, but it's like so that's
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Sometimes it's looking at the tasks themselves and seeing like, are these tasks that I should be doing? Or maybe I have to have a conversation with my boss if these are torturing me day in and day out, and I'm really struggling to get through them. Maybe something else needs to change. That is a great point.
Yeah, in our group, we talked a little bit about like the kind of some like the small admin type tasks that are boring and don't seem very important, but you should be like doing them week to week. And came up with maybe trying to template them beforehand, or like timing yourself and then trying to compete with your time each week.
Do like a leaderboard for yourself.
Yeah,
I love that.
Like I know I mentioned it earlier and someone else did too, but like FocusMate and body doubling is really great for admin tasks. And just so body doubling is just having someone in the room or having someone nearby that's working at the same time that you are. And it's something magical about it when you have ADHD. And if you reserve admin tasks for body doubling, like if you say 1 hour a week, I'm going to do body doubling of FocusMate or with that, and I'm going to do all my admin tasks during that time, it's amazing how well that can work.
Nice.
Yeah, someone in our group mentioned I just said that writing notes and documentation are always the thing that I get really behind on. And some of it is just the process of everything is typed now, and typing for me has never been a fast way to get the thoughts out. So they were just sharing about voice to text options to say it first and then edit later if needed.
Yeah, there's some really great, like the software's come so far. Like it's really, really good these days. I know one, I think it's called Otter.ai, I believe. And that one's really good. You can just like, you hit it, record, and it'll just record, and it'll save the recording, but also give you like the transcript. And that one's super nice. And there's a bunch of tools that kind of work like that. And you can also, I know like some people really prefer to like handwrite things. Like that is where they like, there's something about that connection from your brain to your hand that just like works. And so one way you can do that, if your handwriting is neat, I'm super jealous because my handwriting is atrocious. But one thing you could do is handwrite something and then literally read it to like one of those text to, you know, speech to text translators. So you could use it that way to make that transfer. Because for me, like scanning my handwriting doesn't work at all, because it's just like I can barely read my own handwriting.
The technology is not that good yet.
Yeah, it's not that good yet.
I will say one thing that's super helped me, not to like throw out a specific product like that, but Rocketbook has, you know, if you want to buy the notebook, you can easily scan you write things down and you scan it with the app, and you know, uploads in the cloud and write the transcript. But they also have like these squares that you can use. So basically they're supposed to be for whiteboards, but you can pretty much put it on anything that's like a white plain piece of paper, and it will still do all the work of Rocketbook without having to deal with like a specific Rocketbook notebook or whatever. And they're like $15 for these squares that you could put anywhere. So personally, I use a whiteboard notebook with the squares because I like I bought mini, like, you know, super fine point whiteboard marker pens, because then I get to like erase it and stuff. But yeah, I'll put a link to the Rocketbook squares because they're like super cheap and affordable. And the software is great.
Nice. I know Ryan Mayer, who Trina and I know, he's an ADHD coach. He was on my podcast a few months ago and he was raving about Rocketbooks too. So I haven't really looked into them, and now that's my second recommendation. So I should probably check that out.
I have one 2 feet away from me that's unopened, and I've had it for months. I will bust it open after this today and check it out, because yeah, I don't know why opening it looked overwhelming, and it's just
awesome. We're at the hour mark. Is there one last thing someone wanted to say? But I want to make sure people can get out on time.
I was just going to mention they have index cards, which is also nice because I tend to write on index cards, and then they're terrible for keeping track of. So
right. I use index cards too. They're just like everywhere. But cool. Thank you everyone for coming. This is awesome to hang out again. Next week, we're going to be talking about procrastination and kind of going into some of the more specifics of like the brain chemistry, like why people with ADHD, why our brains work different. So we're going to go a little bit kind of into the, you know, neuroscience stuff and procrastination. And then, yeah, so we'll see all of you all next week, and feel free to post. Someone mentioned link, you did the Rocketbook links there.
Yeah,
if you do it in the Maven one.
Yeah,
if you put it in the Maven chat, it'll stay there because this chat is about to go away.
Yeah. But any other recommendations that you guys have for these type of things, if you put them over there, I think that would be fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
I was just a quick question. Sorry, not to interrupt you guys. I was just wondering if somebody is going to be recording what people are putting in the chat, just so it doesn't disappear.
Yeah. So the way Zoom does record everything, including the chat. So if you go to the recording, it'll be automatically added in Maven. And if you go to the recording, the chat is sort of available with it, but it's sort of within the Zoom interface. So you could go through it and find it, but otherwise the chat is kind of like not super accessible, which is why posting something into Maven is a little bit better to get to it later. Cool.
Awesome. I'll do both. Thank you.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. See you all next week.